So I think this is, according to what we've tracked so far, this is episode 7.
Wow. You know what's crazy? It doesn't feel like we've done 7 of these.
I don't think so. I know it's pretty crazy, but I think this is episode 7, according to what we've canned. This is our first episode that we've recorded since we started pushing them live. So,
Right. So we're officially live now. Hopefully
so
it's
we're
a great
officially
reception.
live. I know we're going to be overwhelmed with it. So far, I've had a lot of people comment on LinkedIn and stuff about that they're excited or that they think this topic is worth us diving into. So that's good.
Yeah.
Um, Volume's not there, but the volume we're trying to get to, we talked about it in our first episode. I really want to reach get a good reach of people kind of listening on a consistent basis. So if for anyone who's watching, I'd really appreciate, more than any kind of support you can offer, share this directly with somebody, a man, some guy in your life. We're approaching Father's Day here on in terms
Yeah.
of our timing. Share it with somebody who, another guy who can kind of, open up the topic of whether it's vulnerability or just talking about how things are going and being a little bit more descriptive with how you're feeling about how things are going.
And vulnerable. I mean, one thing that I think is really interesting too is people I've mentioned it to have been, guys, but also girls. And a lot of the women in our lives that I talk to about this, like with my family, I think they also are like, yeah, this is important. People need to talk about their feelings. Even them, sometimes they don't necessarily talk
Yeah.
about their feelings, right? So I think it's just a good message overall. Obviously, we're trying to reach men because we're men and we can speak to what we know. But I also think this is, a better conversation to have with the general public. Just, hey, let's talk about stuff and actually be vulnerable, describe our feelings.
Yeah, we live in a world, right now, where it's like, they always talk about, like, social media is like your highlight reel, right? Like,
Yeah.
all you do is share your positives, your ups and stuff like that. And we forget that a lot of our times are in those lower times, or that those are the standout pieces or things like that. And that's becoming more known. But that being said, you do still try and hide some of the failures or the struggles,
Yeah.
and then you cover them up, like, sometimes even like those highs can actually be reflections of lows, right? Like going out and drinking every night or something like that seems like
Yeah.
you're partying and having a great time, but in reality it's like, well, why are you kind of doing that? Like, do you
Nobody
actually?
films yeah, nobody films The Hangover either, right? Like there's also a
Nobody films
direct
The
down to
Hangover.
that, right? Nobody's like, "Hey, look how sad I feel."
Or even, and I'm not, I definitely enjoy a good cocktail or a good beer or
Sure.
something like that. But it, you know there is a dependency sometimes you got to be careful of, right?
For
Like,
sure.
do I need this? Is this something where if I didn't have one today, would I be thinking about it later?
Yeah.
And that's actually dependence, and that's dependent behavior, and it just becomes like a little bit of an alarming um, question to ask
Yeah.
yourself. Like, are you actually dependent on this kind of stuff?
But I think having that conversation is something that's like more important, right? Like I think, and I
Sure.
could be wrong, I could be generalizing, but I think a lot of people
Yeah.
don't even like let themselves have that internal monologue, right? And so
Right.
like you don't even get to that place where you're asking yourself, is one too many? Am I craving
Yeah.
this drink, right? So like I think even just voicing those opinions are important because then other people get to think about it.
Yeah. And like, even, yeah, there's all sorts of rationalizing you can do.
Oh yeah.
I know for me too, like, I'll say, like, I do feel like I can control myself pretty well with any kind of alcohol or anything like that. I also don't really partake in other things like
Yeah.
smoking or anything like that. So this is like the one thing. But I always feel like, well, I only do one, right?
Yeah.
So, or one or two, and it's like not a big deal or something like that. Whereas other people, if you look at other people, you kind of use other people's, like, real extreme benchmarks as a rationalization for your own kind of like behavior patterns.
Yeah.
You're like, well, at least I don't do this.
Yeah, it's very easy to do that,
There's
right?
always somebody where, like we were just talking about before this, we're like, well, at least I'm not Kanye.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It's like, well, no matter what I do, all the bad, it's like, well, I didn't go Kanye
I
levels,
might
so
I might have an extreme view, but I'm not Kanye.
that's right. That's right. I think it does. That is kind of interesting, though, right? We use those extreme examples to justify our regular everyday,
So
right? So
it's like,
that throws off the data a little bit.
but I wanted to start the episode. I think this is a great way to start it. Why don't you? Can you give us a little life update? I think you did it on the last podcast,
Sure.
but I want to hear about your first week and how things are going at your new gig.
Yeah, yeah, new gig just started. So it's an advertising agency. You know this already. But just for
Oh,
any listeners, just started about 2 weeks ago. And so first week I felt like a homeschool kid. I think I mentioned that to you, right? Where I was like, man, I got to get used to social interaction just because last gig was completely remote, right? And so that was an adjustment period because there's social dynamics at play. There's workplace, not politics, but like I guess social hierarchy is the way to describe it, right? And so you have to kind of like, oh, that person knows this person, and maybe they hang out outside of work, and that's how they have this conversation or how they have this dynamic, right? And so those things were incredibly overwhelming during that whole first week, and just trying to understand like it's like I said, it was like being homeschooled and being like, what is this? There's society, and I had to like use tools that I wasn't used to using before, and so that was fun. But now that I'm like in full swing of things, I feel good. I feel like I like it a lot. It's a really welcoming environment, and I'm in the upswing period of that previous downturn, which is nice, right? It's a
yeah.
it's a great place to be compared to a month ago where I was like, man, I'm uncertain I'm going to find anything, right?
Yeah. No, it's great. And that's important too. I think it's important that you reflect on that, like, because, you know, the only thing that's certain is you're gonna have like
Yeah,
downturns. Like, there's just no way to avoid like that. You're gonna go through the hard stuff. And I mean, I think that that's the struggle sometimes with this. We were talking about with this podcast. When we both started this podcast, part of the reason that it came out or that we decided to do it was that we were both going through some really tough downswings,
absolutely.
really related to the business side of things and professional side of the world. But it was kind of really spilling over. And I remember specifically feeling like it was spilling over to so much of the degree that, you know, not only am I um, struggling financially or business wise, but I'm also now just struggling with my self worth as a man,
Yeah.
self worth as a provider for my family, father,
The
all
way I
this kind of
attribute
stuff.
value. Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and the value I have on all these places. It was really hard. So we started this because I thought that, well, the best way to probably get over it or get through it is to have these conversations, because I'm not the only one. And anytime I mentioned it to somebody, because I started to be more honest with how I felt, right?
Yeah,
So the more honest I was with how I felt, the more, I obviously you and I were kind of going through the same thing because
sure.
we were working together at the time. And so it was kind of nice to have somebody to be together in this with.
Absolutely.
Um, and then but then every time I mention somebody else, they're like, oh yeah, I went through the same thing, or I'm going through the same thing, or I'm also in a tough place, or it was so evident that, there's a whole missing communication here because we're all kind of doing this silently and in silos by
It's
ourselves.
it's like that little silent suffering, right? And we just assume that, nobody wants to be bothered with it or nobody wants to talk about it. I also just think it's hard to be vulnerable. It's hard to be vulnerable in general, right? Like
Yeah,
for almost anybody, like even with my spouse, right? Like my wife, sometimes it's hard
sure.
for me to be vulnerable about what's going on. So, asking ourselves to be vulnerable with the public and just people we're seeing in everyday life,
Yeah, yeah.
that's a hard sell. It's a hard situation.
It's a super hard sell. Well, and also I think it was way, you're right, it's way easier to be vulnerable about those insecurities or that level of self-doubt. It's easier to do that with somebody that you don't have that connection with as much. Which is why I think, us talking about it and people listening who don't maybe know us directly or don't talk to us on a daily basis or something might be beneficial.
Yeah.
But yeah, yeah, I'm talking to my wife and stuff like that too. um, and you're just kind of like, I just don't know, like I just am not feeling like I have much value, or I'm not worth this, or I'm really worried if I'm uh a good man or a good father or something
Yeah.
like that. You really, that's tough to go through. And then but the hard part about it is that too, I think that the reason that we're kind of quiet about it, the reason that I think men are quiet about it, is because the response is not what I think that men actually need.
Right. It's
Like
like
them,
coddling, right? Like, no, no, you're
yeah.
great. You're great. Like my
It's
wife will
the
be like, you're
hugs.
amazing.
It's like unlimited hugs, and like kind of discounting the feelings a little bit, like, but you're great, you're so smart, you're so, and it's like, yeah, but I don't feel that way, right? Like, I don't
Yeah.
feel it. And but what a man, what I think is helpful is like turning that around, getting on a winning streak. Like, you need a win,
Yeah.
like getting a win. So like doing something productive, doing something that where you can actually get a win out of it, I think is a really good thing. So I'm really happy for you that you're
Oh,
able to
thanks.
get a
Thanks.
job,
Yeah.
that it paid really well. I don't know if
Yeah.
it was what you're expecting or
Better than
above
I
what
was
you're
expecting.
expecting.
Yeah, better than what I was expecting. More money than I've made. So that's kind of nice, right?
Right. Yeah. So it pays well. It gives you kind of that validation of what you needed at the time. I
Yeah.
think ideally we don't need external validation, but I think sometimes we need achievement and we need to have that kind of soothing behavior
No, no, for
or
sure.
soothing result, I guess. Um, but the reason I wanted to really talk about it is, one, to just give everybody an update, because I think
Yeah.
as we build a community, people will care about it, and we don't want to leave anybody in a cliffhanger
For
that
sure.
we really. And then I watch.
Like
I
he never
end the
found a
episode
job.
right there. But there's one major life update I wanted to share. End episode.
Bum. Done. We never produce
Cliffhanger.
anything again.
Never again. That was it. That's the end of the podcast. Thanks for everybody listening. But I so what I started to do, because I thought, we're really on. I want this to be. I think the more this will grow, the more we focus on this being kind of a
Yeah.
purpose and like goal, that kind of a goal driven
And
thing.
community driven, right? Like I
Right.
think that's a big part of it, right? Is like also meeting other men and talking about our things, even if that's online. I don't know what
Exactly.
format that looks like yet, but discussing with other men and creating a place where everybody feels like they can share,
Yeah.
right? And I think you
Yeah.
got there through you were doing some Reddit research recently, right?
Exactly. Which is not my channel of comfort. Like
Sure.
Reddit is not. I remember I did it a couple of years ago, and it was not a great experience.
Well, Redditors are
But
like, yeah, they're notoriously like cynical. So I get it. It's a rough space.
it is an interesting thing. I remember I used to work somewhere where they were actually really big on Reddit, but I so I restarted my profile, and started taking a look, because I was looking at like I know that people are going to these types of places, um, seeking advice from people who are, again, like, not that anonymous. Like, I don't know you from. I just need advice from somebody who's not going to have all this like emotional coddling or baggage or something like that. Like I really just need somebody's take on this, or how do you deal with this kind of thing, because they feel like they can't talk to somebody about it, or they're not comfortable talking to somebody about it in their
Right.
personal circles in their lives, right? And I was really floored. I've subscribed to like some channels that were like Ask Dads, because I thought, well, I'll just lean into kind of what I feel comfortable with. And I guess with the show, kind of our dynamics a little bit different, which I think
Sure.
is good, in that you've got these experiences, I've got these ones. And so I started going to like new first time dads, Ask Dad, that kind of stuff, um, and then also people like Ask Men and stuff like that too. So more broad, but I was really surprised, and the reason I wanted to talk about and make sure we revisited kind of where you were in your headspace a few months ago with episodes 1, 2, and 3, probably,
Right.
um, because now we're in a different, you've really turned it around. You're at a different angle. You're on the upswing
I'm on
of
the
how things are
upswing.
going.
Yeah.
It's good.
Upswing of cycle for sure. Yeah, I think it is interesting, right? Because like I don't know. I think when I was in that really downturned area, right, where job hunting, a lot of rejections up front, right? It is hard to see a light at the end of the tunnel, right? It's like it feels a little aimless, which I hate feeling, right? I think nobody really likes feeling aimless. And so I think it's nice that we're also talking about the parts where we're on upswings now, right? I'm in a much better place. I feel better. I think this is a much better space for us to be in. Financially, I'm not worried anymore, which is great, right? So I think
Exactly.
that makes a big difference in showing. I think it shows on like just how I even interact with you, right? Like I think even those interactions during those times where like we were first talking about like, oh, hey, updates on our lives and what's going on. I think even now I feel a lot better about that. I just feel there's a demeanor
Yeah,
shift.
exactly. It's obviously easier to share our feelings, or share more about ourselves when we are in a more positive place. So it's also easier, I think, to talk about our feelings when we're, um, let's say, like not going through it. Like I remember for a while, like I could talk to anybody about like, well, you know, failure is just part of the process, or it's opening doors to something new, and it's all that kind of stuff. But it, you know, when you're going through it, it sucks. And I think that's what I saw on Reddit, which I was very, you know, which I thought was really interesting, was a lot of people, especially a lot of younger people. I was talking about, like, you know, I'm in my later 30s here, and a lot of people really early thinking that they're already in this like stuck position, or that they've you know screwed something up, or that they just feel like aimless or depressed or something like that at a pretty young age, like 24, 26, something like that.
They feel like the
uh,
die's cast already, right? This is my life now.
it is right. And I think it's critical to really make somebody aware, like how many turns your life's going to go through in different phases and all this kind of stuff, and that it's that nothing is cast at this point, really.
Yeah.
That you can, you know, that you've got so much coming your way, and that you have to kind of like get through a lot of like turn, and you have to be kind of. I think what's great is that I think, you know, for people, again, it's hard. It's really hard to acknowledge this as you're going through it, and only when you kind of are kind of after it do you maybe see it. But like those early failures really help you deal with the ones that they come later. Like this
Yeah.
one, even though there was a lot of sucky things, and there was a lot of sucky things that have happened in the few months, with especially with our business side of things.
Right.
um you know, not just losing clients, but then having some clients hold back payments and all this kind of stuff. It was really difficult to go through all that kind of stuff. But I do know, I mean, there's lessons learned, and then that now I wouldn't make similar mistakes with some of our relationships.
Yeah.
But also, I think that that like your that I know that some of this is just like it's fine. Like I
Yeah.
didn't feel as devastated, I think, as I would have had this happened like 10 years ago.
I think the difference is that we have some time, right? Like I'm not much younger, but like at 30 versus at 20, right? You think about it, at 20, this is your first time experiencing this downturn, right? You
Yeah,
don't see how many times this has happened or how many times this could happen, right? So it's like it's happening in real time and you don't know anything else. I think after you grow a little bit, you turn a little bit older, and I'm sure older people will tell us even further that like maybe we have it completely wrong, right? But I
yeah,
think you get older and you start to realize, oh, these are the cycles, these are the things, right? Like
yeah.
you go through this phase, and now I'm probably going to go through 5 or 10 other phases, right? And
I
it's going to
know
keep happening.
it does. Yeah, and it's also like, I mean, I think it helps. I mean, it does help having kids. I mean, it helps and it hurts. It's, you know, it's
Sure,
hard. You have a lot of
more
like
pressure.
stress.
Yeah, more
It's a
pressure
lot of
too, though.
pressure, a
Yeah,
lot of stress, all that kind of. But like, you know, like with kids and stuff too. Like, you know, my daughter's just starting to try and learn how to read. Right.
yeah.
Um, Now, so what's funny about my daughter is that when she was in pre-K, like pre-K grades, her teacher, I mean, she's the sweet, my daughter's the sweetest, absolute sweetest. And everybody always thinks that and says that. But what was really funny was when she was in pre-K, her teacher told us, like kind of in like a parent teacher conference kind of way, she's like, Jovi's, you know, Jovi's my daughter's name. She's like, she is so sweet. She's so sweet, and she's over. But I think she just lacks persistence and lacks ambition and stuff like that,
That's
because
fair.
she'll just give
Yeah,
up fairly quick.
yeah,
Like
yeah.
if
That's
things are
fair.
hard, she just kind of gives up. She
Me too,
wants the
buddy.
easy route.
Me too, buddy. I
she
get it.
she wants the easy route. She wants that kind of thing. So then what's funny is that now she's, you know, she's moving into reading. Well, you don't just like know how to read.
Right.
I
Takes
mean,
time.
um, and so she's having to like, she would get to a point with my wife where my wife's trying to get this like, you know, trying to walk with her on these steps. And she's getting kind of more and more frustrated as she's going, because it's like, you know, one little mistake here, one little mistake there, you know, they're starting to compile in her head, like she just can't do it, she's not
Right.
learning it. And then she just like the other day, she just had kind of a meltdown of just like, I just don't want to, like, I just hate it. I'm not good at it, blah, blah, blah. And so I just think, you know, I'm doing, we do the same thing. So
Yeah.
what if we're 24, 28, 30,
It's the
so
same
what? You're
concept.
like,
It
oh crap,
applies.
you lost some,
Yeah.
you did this thing happened, right? And
Yeah.
then we can wallow and cry and be like, this shouldn't have happened. And yes, and all that kind of stuff. Or, we take the lesson of like, look, this is just part of it. This just has to be part of it. This is just part of what we're doing next. This is part of how we get better at what we do,
Yeah.
or we get stronger and more developed. But I think that what my wife and I, and what I specifically try to impart, and I try to impart it with like in-laws and stuff like that. It's a
Yeah.
really interesting conversation to have with somebody. Is like, when you're in a point where you're worrying, like let's say you were a couple months ago or something
Sure.
like that, where you're worried about what your future looks like, and you have all these worries and you have all these fears building up, and then a couple I think it's good to like write them down, or just kind of be clear about what you are worried about, and then when you are a few months away from it and most of that worry is gone or resolved, it's important to close that and be like, God, I was so worried that I wouldn't find a job. You found a job. I was
Yeah.
so worried that our income would be so devastated by this thing, like that you would be making so much less. No, you're doing great. You're so
Yeah.
worried about finding a workplace that would make me feel like this. No, it's not. Like
Yeah.
all these things, but we don't do that enough. I don't think we'd go back and do that audit, or that reconciling of the audit of your worries. Uh, because I think if we did that, we'd realize that so many times, like, our worries were just like that. We were just playing out this future,
Yeah.
and we just did not, that we obviously couldn't see what was coming up. Like, you didn't know this company existed before you
Yeah.
applied to it, that kind of stuff.
Not at all. Not even
Right.
slightly.
And most companies you applied for, I'm sure you didn't know existed at the
There
time.
was a period where I was putting a lot of applications out. There was I
We
think
all do. You got to
I was
cast your
telling my
net.
buddy of mine. It was getting to like at least 20 a week.
Yeah,
It was getting pretty high up there. It all eventually worked out, obviously, right? But I think
exactly.
without that faith that something's gonna come, it becomes a little bit harder, right?
Right.
I almost think like that faith is also part of it, right? Because when I almost feel like when I started kind of accepting like, hey, something's gonna come. Maybe I don't know when. Maybe I don't know the specifics, but something's gonna come. That's when things starting to change. I almost feel like that faith is sometimes a little bit of a part of us making the changes and kind of getting better,
Right.
like actively. Like I think my interviews got better at that point, right? Like I was like, you know what,
That's
something's
true.
gonna come. One of them's bound to hit, so I'm gonna do whatever I can and be the best I can in this moment, and that changed things.
Yeah. Well, and if you kind of believe in that whole vision of something's going to work out, so I guess it's kind of like a destined kind of view
Yeah,
of the world or something like that, which I'm sure not everybody holds and stuff. But I think that it's kind of like with Edison, right? Like you asked him, Thomas Edison, you asked him like, what did he take? Like 2000, like different, he had 2000 failures or something like that
right.
before he made the light bulb. And if you asked him, or when he was asked like, well, how did it feel to fail 2000 times or something? He's like, I didn't fail. I just figured out 2000 ways not to make a light bulb. Right. Like
Yeah,
all I figured out was just the notes. So like every application you sent, you could look at, it's just like rejection, 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 rejection. But I mean, ultimately, really, it was just like, look how much, like, everything needed to align. Like, you couldn't get any of those I mean, I'm a believer in that kind of mentality of like,
sure.
you could not have, like, the position that was open for you that you accepted, that's got you in a good place right now, needed the time.
And the filtering, right?
Well, but it needed the time, right? Like everything had to align. I've been on the other side of hiring, and you get the application at the right,
It's true.
you receive the application at the right time. It looks right. It matches all the qualifications you're looking for. And then all the meetings that need to happen, everything needs to happen at that time. And let's say like you said, the quality of your interviewing improved, the quality of your, kind of what you're looking for and how you wanted to ask questions back because you had gone through other interviews that didn't work out where you felt like the culture wasn't going to be a right fit or the
Yeah.
opportunity didn't match. All that stuff needed to happen. You needed to develop and carve those skills out to have the success that you ended up having. But if you would have, if this exact job, it's arguable, obviously you
No,
can't
no, no.
run
Yeah, of
this,
course.
but it's arguable to say that if this job would have been the first thing you would have applied for and it had that interview, you may not have walked away with the position.
I don't know if I would have. And you make a very valid point, right? Something that also happened during that time is I started reaching out to friends, right? And asking them to like, hey, can you read my interview, my resume? Can you read my resume real quick? Get an idea. I have a friend who works in recruiting and I don't know why I didn't think about it before that, but I was like, hey, can you read my resume and just tell me things you want to get rid of? Some suggestions I took, some suggestions I didn't. Like
Of
he
course.
told me to get rid of part of my intro, which is like me calling myself a coffee enthusiast. But I'll say everybody who reached out always wanted to ask about coffee, so it was a
Good
good
deal.
move to keep it in. But the point is that I think that also inspired confidence, but then also put me in a position where I felt better to keep applying to things. Right?
Yeah, I think so. I think
Without that initial
I mean,
ejection, it wouldn't have happened. Yeah.
ultimately everything worked out the way that it did because of those things. But I always think of like, instead of, it's like a different point of view of like, instead of the world working against you, what if you had the perspective that everything's working for you and for your highest good, like, so that like that every no, every time somebody's like, nope, not Francisco, he's out, no, not Francisco, he's out, that was actually, instead of it being an impediment to you getting a job, it was working for you, because it's just like that, no, like, instead of them saying no, he's not right for the job, it's just like, no, he's meant for another
A
thing,
different
not here,
position. Yeah.
out. No, he's meant for another thing, out. So I think if you change that kind of perspective, just like, it may feel like the constant no's are there saying that you're not good enough, but instead what they might be saying is that this is not where you're supposed to be going, and we're guiding you on the right path to get you where you're supposed to be.
Yeah.
And I think that outlook really changes like the if you can have that during like the suckiest times of the lows, um you can realize, instead of it feeling like everything is just working against you, just say like, there's a path for you that is far away from where you were, and that takes a lot of work to get you over to where you're supposed to be going, but kind
Right.
of keep your eyes open to where you're supposed to go, and how you're supposed to get on that road.
And keep going, right? I think that's like
Yeah.
also the hard part, right? Is like, you run into these failures and you can end it right there and you can say, not necessarily like end it all the way, but I mean, like, just stop putting any more effort towards it. Oh, this isn't working. So I need to reshift my entire idea. And maybe I need to go into a different industry. Maybe I need to completely do something different. Sometimes I think getting that perseverance is harder. It's like what you were talking about with your daughter, right? It's kind of like you need the faith in order to keep persevering, right?
Sure.
So that way, eventually, you get to where you're at. I'm not saying you can't cut your losses at some point. Sometimes I do think that does make sense, right? Like you have to cut losses and readjust and reevaluate what you're doing. But I think without the faith, without that calm knowing of things are going to work out for me, it's a lot harder. It's a lot harder to do things.
And then where you, yeah, I agree, and then where you build that up is those early failures, like
Yeah,
just constant early failure of like, of that didn't work out, or that didn't go the way I thought it was supposed to go, or that job sucked and I don't want to do that again, or all those different steps of just constantly early failure, and then early like moves that you feel good about, like integrity moves, if you're really moving away from something you don't align with, or you're deciding you're not going to do something that actually maybe is kind of a teaser of like, that actually would be great financially or something, but I don't see myself in that kind of culture anymore, or I want to do that. And I think that because when you make those choices and you pay the heavy price, that's how you learn the lesson. Like
yeah,
what the client that we were just talking about that ended up holding back payment and really ended up kind of being the initiators of like a lot of the loss we had recently.
sure.
Um, it was I mean, it was an advantageous financial decision at first. It was also a decision I thought was a good fit initially too, from a kind of a personal standpoint. But I kind of pushed aside a lot of the learning that I had when I had initially worked with them years and years ago, in order to kind of force this to happen.
Right.
And then it just burned at the end. And I just thought, obviously you can't know everything, how everything's going to play out. But at the same time, um, I ignored a lot of my intuition to force this to keep going instead of realizing this doesn't fit and this probably is not the best way to go about this. And hey, this is not achieving what I wanted to for my business.
You know, that's interesting though, because I think that a lot of that, we need those emotional audits, like you were mentioning. I love that
Right.
idea of an emotional audit, right? I think when we're not doing those things, we create narratives in our heads. And especially you and me, I think we're able to justify a lot of things like we've talked about in the past, right? You're able to justify and create this narrative in your head, right? Like who doesn't love the story of like, I used to work for this place, it didn't work out. I come back and now I get to work for them, right? As in work with them in a different capacity, and things have had this nice full circle moment. And that is beautiful. That is a wonderful thing. But at the same time, it kind of hinders us from looking at it and thinking about, oh, hey, is this what I want? Is this align? Right? Like timing wise, it was a huge time suck. That became most of
Right.
what we were doing day in, day out, right?
Good.
And so like I think that's like a really, really good point, that we have to be careful about the narratives we tell ourselves and falling into these stories, right? It's almost
Yeah.
like we have to keep doing those emotional audits and use that feedback
Yeah.
to continue and to continue to like making decisions.
Well, and it was time and it was stress and it was just general fit. Like we said constantly, like it didn't seem like we were really the resource that was needed. So we kind of felt all disjointed the whole time, like we were the squeaky wheel because it would just not was as easy as we thought. So I think yeah, there's a lot of lessons to be learned from that, but um, but and obviously hindsight is 2020.
Of
But I
course,
will
always.
say, I know you can easily say all these things I would have done differently, but yeah, I mean it's something that you learn, and and then you just kind of accept that you're not always going to make the right decision. I didn't, in this case, I would say it's probably not the right decision to make for the business and building things out, but it was meant for some, I think it was meant for some purpose because like we said, we started doing this, we started focusing here. We both got it, kind of devastated by the change, and that prompted us to say, well, maybe we can use this for something good come out of it. Aside from us looking for more work, maybe we can use it for something good. Maybe we can be let's just talk about it because I feel like nobody's talking about this when you
Yeah,
get
the
hit
whole
rock
podcast
bottom.
was born from that,
Right.
right?
So then
So
we
yeah,
kind of
there's something
birthed out of
there.
that. But so let's take a pause there because I
Yeah,
know
I was
you've
gonna
got
say
your
we're coming
call.
up on time right here, so that'd be great. We'll come back to this.
Come back. The thing actually I was trying to communicate to my daughter too with
Sure.
her reading, and also that I've had to reflect on myself is so, sometimes when bad things are happening or when you're kind of in a rough patch, I take solace a lot in understanding what I can actually control. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, so ultimately, you can't, a lot of times you can't control the external circumstances. I mean, there's a limited level of control, but to getting a job and things like that. One of the things that you can't control at all is sometimes whether or not you get the call back or anything like that. You can obviously make yourself a good candidate and all these things, but I think really it comes down to you can always decide your how you're going to address the situation. What kind of outlook are you going to have on your experience at the
Yeah, your
moment?
your response to it almost, right?
Exactly. It's kind of like, you know, do you control your emotions all the time, whether or not you're upset about something, whether you're feeling in a positive, whether you're happy about something, whether you're feeling motivated, all these different things, you control those emotions. So I think in those times of like despair, when you feel um kind of deflated,
Defeated.
knocked down, defeated, yeah, all these types of words that we use, or in your depressed states like we're seeing with some of the Reddit comments, I think it's important to separate. There's a couple of things. There's like it's separating your emotions and how you feel from actually the circumstances themselves. Like you can look at your certain situation, like a lot of what I've done lately in dealing with some of the business downturn is realizing and reflecting on the fact that, well, the businesses that I had that have gone now were really big stress and time sucks. Like my quality of my day was not great
Right.
during those times. So I could also look at this as like a very liberating time frame, right? I don't have as much of a demand on my plate. We're still getting by just fine. Like we may not be making, you know, hand over fist and getting way ahead in our financial goals, but I get to enjoy the summer a little bit more with my kids now. Now, you know, they're
Yeah.
out of school.
Timing actually makes a difference too with that, right? Like you wouldn't have gotten to do that otherwise, right? Like you were strapped for time. And there are benefits to even those like lost moments. But it's so hard to remember that in the moment, right? It's hard when you're actually in it to be like have the perspective of like, oh well this might be a good thing, right?
Oh, 100%. Because yeah, like you're like, well, this, yeah, but this sucks because this derails the plan or this derails the trajectory. Or, you know, frankly, I mean, I get a lot of my self worth and value based on achievement. So
Yeah.
when I lose,
It
then I have no
hurts.
worth, you
It
know, and it's
hurts.
different. As my worth goes down, my self worth goes down. And that's obviously pretty hard to deal with. But I think so understanding that you can control your emotions at any given time, you can really decide how you're going to approach this next thing. But then also, I think what I really like to reconsider too is focusing on what elements of this can you control. So like for my daughter too with her reading, and I know I just keep coming back to it, but it's a simplistic thing that we all can do,
Yeah.
but we weren't always able to do it. So I just kind of like to come back to it and say like for her, you know, she because then she started telling me like it, you know, I'm like, why are you so upset about not knowing how? You know, it's going to be fun. And she's worried that, but she opened up to me that, you know, she's worried about next year with schools. She heard it's going to be a lot harder. Her teacher, my kids
And
go
in her
to a
defense, she has to do it in French. So
exactly. I was just gonna say my kids go to a French immersion
yeah.
school. It does make it trickier. So my kids go to this French immersion school. So in first grade, the teacher speaks no English the entire day, and so she has to pick it up. And she's like, I just don't know if I know French that well. So there's a lot of anxiety coming up all of a sudden for her, which was surprising because she's 6, right? And
Yeah.
you're just like, oh my god, you're 6 years old. You shouldn't have all this weight on you. But that's what I did with her. Is I said, okay, I understand. I hear that you're nervous about school. I hear that you have anxiety, and she and I talked a little about anxiety. Thank God for Inside Out too,
I know. It explains it a little bit, right?
because it brought, yeah, exactly. That's literally a main character of the show, and so I could use those terms a little bit more. I'm like, what did anxiety do in the movie? But which, if you haven't seen it, you really should. I mean, Inside Out 1 and 2 are great emotional awareness
Yeah.
movies,
Yeah, they
but
kind of I like that they personify them because then it gives it like a
yeah,
tangible face, right? And you're like, oh, I can identify that emotion very easily. I think for kids, that's probably one of the harder things too, is like just maybe not just kids, maybe everybody. That's literally what we're talking about, right? Where
right,
it's hard to identify what you're going through unless you're doing the emotional audit, and
yeah.
Inside Out kind of forces people to do that, right? You're like, oh, I've had times like that.
Well, and it also positions each of the characters. They're all like nobody's actually trying to harm Riley, the girl that they're inside of. They're not actually trying to harm her. They all think they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. They all think that like anxiety is there, and in the beginning, anxiety is a great asset because it kind of pushes you to be better and pushes you to like try and like do the extra work to accomplish your goals a little bit because you're anxious about living up to certain standards. And
Right.
so I think there's an element of anxiety that is motivating and fueling for you to make a leap into something more challenging. But obviously then it becomes, you know,
It
what we
untangles.
typically think of anxiety, right?
Yeah.
But with my daughter, you know, I was kind of just saying like let's but here's the thing, what can you focus on now, like what's happening today? Like that's another thing, when my business started kind of like going into this downturn, the great part about the way that I bill work and all that kind of stuff is that usually it's on like a 30-day payment window, or 30 to 45 to 60 depending on some clients. And so losing a client today didn't mean I lost all that money today. It actually gave us a little bit of a ramp
Right.
to work things out, to reprioritize, to cut back on spending before the impact hit. If it was all of a sudden today at once, it would have been maybe a different, more panicked story, but it wasn't. but I think that, but the ability to, so then it gave me comfort to be like, here, what can I do today? We can reevaluate our spending immediately today so that we can really decide what needs to be cut in order to preserve us ourselves. It wasn't a mad scramble to go get new business. It wasn't like that kind of stuff. It didn't need to be that, because that's not what we actually have to worry about today. And nothing was like that was happening today. We wouldn't actually feel the impact of all this for a couple months. So that gave us this comfort level. And so even with my daughter too, like if she's worried about, first grade that doesn't start till August, I just told her like, I understand that you're worried about it, and we'll work on it together. But guess what? You don't go to school for another couple months. Let's just take a
Yeah,
minute.
she's got plenty of
Let's
time.
relax. You got time, and you're worried about your reading capability getting to school, and that you might be behind the kids. That's exactly why today we're going to practice. And then tomorrow we're going to practice. We're going to do a little bit more. And the next day, because the more that we do little bits of baby steps toward those really easy objectives of what I can do today, we can actually make those fears so much smaller. Because I said, I told her like, if we can just work on it every day, you'll get yourself to a place where that won't be a concern anymore.
Yeah.
And we didn't mean to, and frankly, we didn't mean, we probably did make those anxiety, that fear come up, because we told her like, if we don't start practicing reading, you won't know. And we said, our older son, when he did first grade, he was he was already reading by the time he got to first grade.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And it was still a difficult year for him, and the transition from kindergarten to first grade. And so we told her like, and he was already reading, and you don't know how to read yet, so accidentally seeding this like additional fear of hers in there. But I think through talking about it, she was able to communicate that that was a part of a concern, and then we were able to just break it down. So I think even with us, when we work through things, men, women, anybody, and we have something big happen where there's fear or there's worry, I think what we can do, the best thing to do is separate the worry, because we're going to come back to that when at the end we can reconcile whether or not that worry even came to fruition, right? But we can take a minute and say, okay, what can I do about it? Like today, now, is there anything that I can do about that right now? And if there's not, then maybe what good is it? What good are you doing actually by worrying about that thing right
Yeah.
now?
Yeah, it's like wasted space in your mind, and it's weird. I feel like I'm definitely an overthinker. I definitely, I think a lot of people do that, right? It's the stuff that keeps you up at night when you're laying there and your mind just kind of spirals. But I think you're right. I mean, something I found for me too is like just taking action, doing anything, even if it's not necessarily like you can get in a dangerous space where you're doing things that are like avoiding it. But I think in general, I think taking action is probably the biggest thing because you're right. Anxiety and worries and all of that has a way of kind of pushing you, and that's really what it comes down to, right? It's pushing you
Yeah,
towards something, and you have to kind of make your way through it. So
yeah, yeah. So I think that's kind of the last point. As we are talking, so kind of taking the whole story, I guess, of this episode, or this episode together. I
sure.
guess what we call them. Um, would for you, what's really cool is that throughout this experience, we've been able to kind of like track you and your progress of how you're kind of going from your job transition, the worries that were there, kind of the fears, the self doubt, the challenges, the struggles, that kind of stuff,
Yeah.
and then see that there's that you were able to get into a mindset of, I'm going to find something, it's going to be great, and it's going to happen. And now you're in that spot, and now we have kind of this really cool timeline of looking back and saying like, yep, look at that chunk of time, like where there was fear, doubt, the whole kind of hero's journey, right? Like,
Yeah.
you don't know where you're going, you don't know how you're going to get there, this kind of stuff, and then you make it through and you're on this side. And then I think, like you started to do, and like what we talked about right here, is that just understanding what you can control about your situation and what you can't. Like, there's nothing that we could have done to turn it around after some of these things happened to us. Like, we just had to move forward and decide what our next best step was, and kind of move through it, and move on to something new that we didn't know was gonna kind of show up.
Yeah. It's kind of like getting adjusted and used to the ebbs and flows of life, right? there's going to be ebbs and flows regardless. And the more you can kind of recognize the patterns and understand that this is just a up moment or a down moment, that helps you kind of better deal with your situation, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's good to get, what I think that something I'd like to talk about in our next one of our next ones is like figuring out, like getting a network of people or friends or something like that around you that not only are supportive of you, but actually are kind of working, not working against you, but
Pushing you.
that pushing you and also helping you identify things that you don't see about yourself, your blind spots.
Yeah.
I think with
That
this
is
with a group of guys, what's good about a group of guys is like we can BS each other all day and we
also, you
can kind of
tease each
like
other
push
a
each
lot,
other and
right?
tease
Like you
each
like to
other.
mess
You
around
just
with
do,
everybody, right?
yeah. And sometimes there's a lot of truth sometimes in behind the teasing and stuff. But I think that what's good, even like on your bachelor party and stuff like that, there's a lot of joking, teasing, all this kind of fun stuff. But there were times when we were kind of just like, so what's your deal? Like, what's the deal with this thing? Like, we're
Yeah,
just
yeah,
kind of
yeah.
calling it
Like
out
you'd
on each
actually
other.
have like a good confrontation moment, not a confrontation in a bad way, but like a friendly confrontation, right?
Well, yeah, because it's like we all go down these paths and we have our own, we have this view of how life looks to us, and then there's a lot of things that we just put blinders onto that we're
Sure.
just like, I'm not going to pay attention to that, or I don't really see that as a big issue, or that's just a thing nobody cares about, blah. But then somebody else can look at us differently and be like, if he didn't do that, he just like accomplished so much more, or
Yeah.
he would mitigate so many, or what's your problem with this,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
what the hell's your problem, like why would you, this tell me the problem of, you're creating conflict in your life because you refuse to accept this, or before what's your deal, like let's talk about it, because it could just be artificial. And that's, I think, what a good friend group can really do, is give you that visibility that you don't really have for yourself. So I think that would
Yeah.
be kind of fun to talk about
No, I
in
think
another
so.
episode, because that could be one to work through.
No, no, absolutely. And I do think there are some instances, even now that I'm thinking of, like where, I've had moments like that where friends are telling me something and it does make sense. It is a moment that helps you kind of gain clarity in your life. Problem is having like a good enough relationship to get to that place.
Hmm.
It's hard because one, you have to value what the other person's saying, right? And if you don't
Sure.
respect and value what the other person's saying, then it's a much harder sell. You're just like, oh, dude, I don't care what you're telling me, right? But
Yeah.
so I think that's the harder sell. But I do. I mean, there are moments I can even think back to, like, we don't have to get into the whole episode here, but like before I got married to my wife, like I remember Ricky, one of my best friends, was like telling me like, hey man, like you guys have been together for like 16, 14 years. Like, you don't want to get married at this point? Why? And I was like, huh, that's a good point. We should talk about that. I should probably go through that, shouldn't I? And so,
Sure. Yeah.
I think that spurred a lot of good conversation about commitment and just life in general. So yeah, I
Sure.
think there's definitely a well there to tap.
Yeah, and I think that we can, and I think that's what we don't really, you got to kind of almost like stage like a sounding board for that kind of thing. And I think with this podcast too, actually, one of the things I'd like to do even is, after we lay out a few episodes, hopefully we figured out our audio visual
Sure.
struggles. Putting all those aside, like then bringing this like compendium of like 8 episodes or something, or first 10 episodes together in front of various different people, and be like, tell us what we're lacking, tell us what we're missing, what is keeping you from being like anxious about
Engaged.
hearing the
Yeah.
next show. Yeah, yeah. So that we can start to work on that kind of stuff, because you and I can do this all day and it
Yeah.
feels great. But
No, that is true. I mean, I got to be honest. I don't know if I've gone back and listened to a lot of these episodes so far. I think I listened to a
yeah,
little bit, but something also is like I don't like looking at myself on camera. Something about that feels weird,
no,
right?
same. Yeah.
It's like a weird. So maybe I got to do it in like audio form, right? But I think you're right. I think feedback is a necessary part of life, and I do like the idea of keeping that in our next episode, or exploring that in our next episode. I think that'd be really fun.
We'll do it. Let's cut. We'll slate one of them as a feedback episode. But I guess till then, we'll see y'all next time.
Yeah, yeah. Bye, everybody. Cool.
I think I got it. Oh, there we go. Stop.